Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Let me know if you're getting audio there. All right. So for everyone that is here either for the first time or coming back to join us, welcome. This is Exchange.js, and I'll stop screen sharing there for a second so it's not quite so Inception-esque. But yeah, welcome. This is our first meetup of the new year. And, we're obviously still dealing with the pandemic, so it's online. It's probably going to be online for the foreseeable future. But, it's cool. We can roll with it. There's actually some fun stuff we can do here. It sounds like people are also organizing a watch party. I'm not sure. So we'll see. If you're not already, you can jump into the comments on YouTube. I will be moderating those on the side of my screen here. And there's also the Slack channel where I believe people are discussing the watch party as well. For those of you that don't know, basically the plan would be to pull up this video stream in Zoom or Meet call, and then people can watch it there and talk in real time instead of having to type everything out. So if you're interested, I think hit up Eston on the Slack channel or leave a comment and we'll sort that out. Without too much to do, though, we're going to jump into a couple housekeeping items, do some news, some jobs, and then we're going to get into this. And when I say get into this tonight, it's kind of exciting. We're going to be playing with a cool new framework called Redwood.js. It is kind of builds itself as the Ruby on Rails of JavaScript. It's new. They're working on version 1.0. Not quite there yet, but they are making some pretty good progress. And I've been playing with it here over the last few weeks and seem pretty excited about it, to be honest. It looks like a pretty slick way to get a Jamstack up and running. So we'll jump into that in a minute. For right now, I did just want to quickly share. We've got a couple things. It looks like there's some new jobs in town. So let me just share those. I'll make this bigger so everyone can read. So this is with Redmond. If you don't know Roberto, he's been around town for a while now and coming to the meetups and things like that. They are hiring through Redmond Tech right now. It looks like looking for multiple positions. It's a mid-senior level. If I'm getting any of this wrong, Roberto, please jump in the comments or hop on to Slack and you can explain exactly what you're looking for. And if people want to know more, the link is in our Slack channel, and I will post it again right now in the comments too, so that you can find it. While we're here too, does anyone have any other jobs or positions that they would like to share? If you do, we have a great place to do that on our Slack channel. You can go and we actually have an opportunities channel. So it's super easy to join. I'm going to switch over and share that tab here. 1 second. Let's switch back to seeing my whole screen. So if you jump over here and go to exchange.js.com/Slack, that's the easiest way. It's going to jump you over to our little invite app where you can put in your email, and you will get a nice little invite pretty quickly in about 30 seconds, inviting you to join our channel. Once you're there, the easiest place to find and share work is on our opportunities channel right here. And you can see there's lots going on even the last few days. So lots of work out there. Hop on it, share the jobs you're looking for, as well as the jobs that you're hiring for, and we will connect you together. All right, so without further ado, there's lots to get through tonight. So I'm going to jump right into it. I would definitely say if you'd like to, I'm going to be coding remotely through a VM on DigitalOcean, yay DigitalOcean. And I've set it up so that you can either tmux in and use, like, you can SSH in, excuse me, and use tmux in Vim. Or today I'll be using Visual Studio Code. Normally I use it with Vim, but I've turned all that stuff off to make it easy for people to access. And you can connect to it as well, so we can code together. So if you think I'm doing a really terrible job of explaining what Redwood is, and you would like to do better, or you just have a mistake that's driving me crazy, then that will be the way to do it. So if you're interested, please pipe up in the channel, or sorry, in the channel comments or in the Slack channel, and I will send you the super secret password to SSH in. Okay, maybe send me a DM just so it pings so that I pick it up. All right. So before we get started with Redwood, I was looking for a good way to explain it, and I was working on some slides and stuff like that. And then I realized they actually have a little infomercial, and it's awesome. So we're going to kick things off by watching that. So let me find it. And
does the JavaScript ecosystem leave you feeling like this? Maybe it's time for something new. Redwood.js. Redwood combines React with GraphQL and Prisma to make what we call an edge-ready framework for the Jamstack. Overwhelmed with Webpack and Babel configuration? Redwood's already taken care of it. Everything talks to each other out of the box, and you can use our generators to write the boilerplate, leaving you to write the fun stuff. Feeling overwhelmed trying to learn yet another JavaScript framework? Redwood has great documentation and an award-winning, friendly tutorial to walk you through just about everything you can do with the framework. Tutorial has not actually won any awards. So don't wait. Download Redwood in the next 30 minutes and you'll receive hundreds of NPM packages absolutely free. Redwood is under very active development and should not be considered ready for production environments. Side effects of Redwood may include decreased stress, increased job satisfaction, and a newfound sense of purpose. Visit redwoodjs.com for more information. So talk with your team today and find out if Redwood's right for your next app. Redwood. It's not just a big tree, it's your new favorite JavaScript framework.
aw, isn't that cute? I have to say it's one of the first times I've seen a JavaScript framework that also has a cute little infomercial to go with it, and it actually does do a pretty good job of explaining it. So we'll get into that in a minute. But I'm just seeing in the comments from Abram, excuse me. It looks like there is a watch party set up. So the link is going to be over in Slack in the Exchange.js meetup channel. That's meetup-exchange.js. So hop in there. It looks like Eston, Abram, Andrew, a couple other people are jumping in. So maybe once you guys are settled in, leave a comment and let me know if you're all able to watch and if it's working for you. Okay, I'm gonna pop open a new tab here and quickly just show everyone what we're gonna be working on. All right, so much screen sharing today. Okay, all right. So hopefully everyone can see that. Maybe I'll make it a little wider and fill that up a bit more. Yeah, that's better. Okay, so I'm going to jump over to the Redwood page first, just so that everyone can see that. So it's pretty easy, Redwood.js.com. And yeah, their little thing is bringing full stack to the Jamstack. And the way I've heard it described is they really are focusing on developer experience. And for anyone that has done work with the Jamstack, which I'll explain in a minute, you may or may not know that that can be really challenging. You know, you're usually setting up React, you might be setting up GraphQL for your API, you could have some kind of service that you're connecting with to do all of your database, things like that. There can just be lots of moving pieces, and the best practices can take a little while to set up. But they're starting to become pretty well known. And so what Redwood does is goes and kind of follows that model of Ruby on Rails, where it has a pretty standard convention for things. It organizes and lets you start an app in a few minutes, get that up and running, and then you can go and quickly do things like use generators to add different parts of your application, be it pages or forms, services, things like that. And the other really interesting thing is how it's organized. So what they do is they have different sides, they're called. They all exist in one repo. And so you'll have things like the web API or the ones that come out of the box. But my understanding is that their intention is to have other sides to applications in the future. So that could be things like a React Native side. I think Flutter has been discussed, iOS, kind of like a native iOS side as well. And so the cool thing is when you run a generator to add a new page or a new component or things like that, it will go and set that up in all of the sides and link that all together so that you can do it seamlessly. So as you add things, the API on the back end will be generated and the front end on all of the different sides will be generated as well. So that's the potential of it. You know, it obviously still has a little bit of work to go, but so far I've gone through the tutorial and I've been really happy with how smooth and how well everything does work. So um, let's jump in. We're going to be going through and following the tutorial today. So what I'll do is we'll jump right into that. I'll get it going because it does take a minute. This is node-based, so there's all packages to install and things like that. So we'll get that going, and then once it's installing, we will go through a bit of what it's doing, maybe take some questions and things like that. So over here, we're going to skip this. There are videos of this whole thing if you want to see them, but because we're doing it live today, we're going to skip that. I've already set up a VM on DigitalOcean here that has everything we need in it. So I should share my screen so you can see everything. Oh, okay. All right, so we're back to Inception again. So here's a terminal. It's open to that VM. And we're just going to go and use yarn create. And am I doing this right? Redwood. Already set up node on it. Yeah, Redwood app. And then we tell it the directory. Yeah. Log. And right away, you can see how it's going. And it's very similar to a generator that you would use for an app like Ruby on Rails, where it's going to infer the name of the application from the name of the directory that we're using. So let's get that going. Now, I have done this on the server already, so hopefully all these packages are already available locally. So we'll leave that running, and we'll jump into the next steps of the tutorial. So let's go back here and let that run for a minute. So what I wanted to point out is this. So this is the rough layout of it. So you'll have a front and a back end side. So the front end side is the web. It's a standard React application with components, cells, forms, and styles. Most of you will recognize components. They're just standard React components. The other things like cells are a conceit that is part of Redwood.js, but basically it's just a higher order function that goes and generates components you can use, and it will handle all the loading and error states and things like that for retrieving data from the server. On the back end, you've got the API, and so it does a couple of things. It defines your database. It defines the schema for that database. So, whether you're using, I think for this tutorial, we'll be using SQLite, but you could be using Postgres, you could be using MySQL, you could be using Fauna. They have connectors for a lot of existing databases, and they're adding more. And then you can also go and define services which extend the GraphQL API that it generates. So it's actually pretty slick. You can really jump in and add new things as you go if you want, very easily. Everything that it writes, it will go, and when you deploy it, it will build your application and do all the code splitting and chunking and stuff like that that you're used to, and then host that somewhere like Netlify, Amazon, wherever you'd like for the front end, so it's static. And then for the back end, right now it'll deploy to Netlify or directly to AWS, but they're working on Google Cloud Run and Google Cloud Functions. I think they're working on Azure Functions as well. So the idea is that just like with the database, you would be able to have adapters that tie in, and when you're ready to deploy, you can take your application from one infrastructure to the next and still use the same coding conventions and things like that that you would normally. So let's jump back to our other window and see. Woohoo! It's done. So on here, you can see my backup from when I did this before. But we're going to change into Redwood blog. Dog next door is barking. And I'll just quickly show you what's in here. Oh, yeah. Tree level 1. Does that work? 2. Focus. Ignore node modules. Hey, there we go. Okay, so basically what you'll see here is we've got the two folders for the different sides, API and web. They both have source files for things like the components and stuff like that in the website. In the back one, in the API, it's going to be the services, things like that. And it will take care of keeping these all in one repo. So you're going to be able to run the Redwood commands to generate things and stuff like that anywhere, and it will go and properly handle the like finding the right directories and the right sides to expose the new functionality and put all the files in the right places. Okay, so we've got our app scaffolded here. I should be able to go and run this. So I'm just going to go back and we can take a look at that, see if I've done this right. Okay, so we're in Redwood blog. Now we should be able to do Redwood dev. I think the only tricky thing is I'm actually running this on a VM, not on my local box. So this port, localhost 8910, will not work. But I figured this out the other day. 1 second. Sure, I've got the right command. Dev server, that's what it is. Okay, so you can run the same command that they have up there, but we're just going to pass, it runs a Webpack dev server on the back end. And so we're just going to tell it to bind to this host 000, which means that anyone on the internet can connect to it. So let's try that. One other thing you'll see too as you work through the tutorial that wasn't immediately clear at the start is you'll see RW sometimes. That is the same as typing the whole Redwood thing. It's just a little shorter. Okay, so let's spin this up and see where we're at. So fingers crossed this will work. Live coding. So you can see right there when we started it up, I did something called generated the Prisma client. That's it generating the code that it would need to connect to the GraphQL API and to the database. So we'll explain what that means in a minute. But now, if I go back to my browser, and I've done this all properly, we should see our blog. Hey, look at that. So this is just like the hello world that you might recognize if you've done any Ruby on Rails development. It shows you just a default page out of the box, explains where to find it, kind of what it looks like, things like that. So as much as I enjoy working in the tutorial, I realize most people are going to be comfortable in something like Visual Studio Code. So we're going to connect there right now, switch it over to that for the rest of this demo. So the easy way to do that is I've got Visual Studio Code SSH'd in to my Redwood server. And then I'll just open the proper folder. And okay. And if I did this properly, woohoo, there we go. We're good to go. Oh, what did I just install there? Oh, well, some extra extensions, it looks like. Oh my goodness, I really did install something. Oh, well, I didn't do that when I did this in practice. We'll see what happens. Okay, so back over here, we've got our API folder and our web folder. I'll make this a bit bigger. We're going to stop and just see how everyone's doing. Hey. All right. So are there any questions? It looks like, Kelsey, you've got one. Well, let me see what I can do there. So I'm just going to pull that up so everyone else can see it. So Kelsey is asking, I missed the definition for sides. Yeah, so we're just basically talking about the different aspects of the application. So right now, when you're talking about a Redwood app, it is just the web side and then the API side, which does the backend. But one of the cool things that I really like about it is that they envision having more sides in the future. So right now, there's only a web side on the client, but you could have a side for something like React Native or iOS, Android. Flutter was another one that came up. So yeah, those are all eventually going to be different sides, and they're trying to build it so that the generators that you use, you can plug in new sides, and that they will be something that the community could develop. So it doesn't necessarily have to come from the core team. All right. Any other questions before I move on to the meat of the tutorial here? Maybe just a thumbs up to make sure that I know people are hearing this okay. Okay. We're going to jump on here. So we're following with the tutorial. We've got it up and running. We should be able to see, I'm just going to make sure that that's screencasting. Yep. So we should be able to see this page. And we're going to go, and they recommend saving it in your first git commit so that you can come back if you mess things up. I think that's a great idea. So I'm going to copy that. And that's for a minute. And from the right directory. Yep. We'll do it this way. I'm going to turn on a very handy little tool called Keycaster 2 that should let everyone see what I'm typing. So there we go. So we'll start a terminal here. I'm going to use something called tmux. It is very handy if you work on a server. If you haven't checked it out, I recommend doing it. It basically lets you make multiple windows and stuff like that. So we'll start up our deb server again. There's our server running there. And then I'm going to go over and we'll save everything in Git for now. So git init, add git commit, initial check-in. Okay, so there we go. Now I can mess up and we can get back. Question for the channel, is everyone able to see my screen here? Like, is the font a good size, or do I need to bump it up? Maybe just leave a comment or let me know if you're having trouble following along. Okay, so yeah, this is the structure. Oh, good font size. There's a comment. Oh, oh no, thank you. This is why we normally have two people doing this. There you go. Okay, that's better. Please, let me know if there's anything I'm doing like that. And then someone else is saying it's small. Okay, I can make it a little bit larger. Thank you, everyone. Let's do that. Drag you over here. Okay, so for space sake, I'm going to hide my terminal when we're not using it like that. But it's still running there. If I open it up again, the server's still alive. And actually, just for anyone interested, yeah, okay, small alongside the chat, good to know. Anyone interested too, that is the link to this blog if you want to check it out. Okay, maybe I'll make this chat bigger too so everyone can see themselves. All right, maybe it's a bit too ambitious. Okay, so everyone should be able to see what we got here, my code, as well as the tutorial. So jumping back here, yeah, this is what we see. So this is where they're talking about the two sides. You can read more about this later if you want to follow along on your own. In before all the GET requests that we have. Yes, very true. I have a feeling that'll probably go down here in a minute. I'm definitely going to shut down this this machine after the demo is over. Yeah, so this is the layout that they have. Their API in the website. You have a Prisma folder where that's going to define the scheme.prisma, and that is basically your database definition almost. It doesn't have tables per se. It has collections and objects, but that's where you're going to define those. And then Seeds.js is useful if you have data that you need to load in, for example, like an admin login, or just, you're loading in country codes or postal codes, something like that, something that you need in your database for the application to function. And then in the source folder, we've got a couple things. The DB and GraphQL.js are both going to be generated for you to start with, so you won't need to play with those yet. And then the GraphQL is generated as you run your app and update the schema. It's going to work to let things like JavaScript clients and other clients access the GraphQL layer. And then services is interesting. It will be generated for us as we use some of the generators later on, but the files in there are going to go and let you do things like access a collection. And so by default, it's going to use GraphQL and connect to whatever database you define in your schema.prisma to do that. But as long as you follow the convention in services for creating and updating and deleting and listing all the objects, then you can actually go in there and modify it. So you could have objects where you're storing everything in fauna, for example. I believe that's how that works. Or you could store them in a Google sheet or something. So it's pretty slick. On the website, very familiar for a lot of people that have done much React. You're going to see there's a public folder where the assets there are just basically deployed for you when you do your build. They're copied one-to-one. You'll have your routes, which we'll get to in a minute, but that basically just defines when you type in a URL, like the homepage or about or something like that, where it's going to go. Components, there are standard React components, just like how you'd see elsewhere. Layouts is pretty self-evident. It's if you've done any Rails development, you can have a standard set of layouts that you can use in all the pages, and it has some little nice helpers to make it easier to include those. And then finally, pages. And the nice thing with these is you can set them up to automatically get picked up by the routing. So just creating them will be enough for things to work there. All right. This is all set up as one project. So they're using Yarn, and the reason they use Yarn is because Yarn has these concepts of workspaces where you have multiple projects and like multiple package files in the same repo. So you can see here, both web and API are actually going to have their own package files. If we jump over here, yeah, so you can see like API has its own node modules and its own package JSON. And down here, web, same thing, its own package JSON, and I don't think we've installed anything yet, so there's no node modules there. All right. So I think I've explained most of what's in here. Again, this is all in the tutorial too, so if you don't want to hear me explain it, you can also jump in and do that yourself later. So this is where it gets interesting. So we're going to use our first generator, and we're going to use it to generate a homepage. So this is definitely getting into the territory where anyone who's done Rails or anything like that is going to be immediately familiar with it. So I'm just going to grab that. Let's come on over here and pull up our terminal again, because remember, this is not running on my local machine. And let's run that generator. And just to be interesting, maybe what I'll do is I'll go in to API just to show that you can run it from anywhere and it should still work. So let's see if this did it properly. Yeah. So even though I was in API, I'll come over to Git just so you can see it more easily. You can see that all of the files it created are actually in web. So even though you're in API, it's aware that there's other sides in your application, and it's gone and created those all in the web side. My understanding is that if you did have those other sides, like a React Native or Flutter or something like that, it would go and create a homepage in those as well, so that the same work could be done quickly in all of those. Okay, so let's save that, create homepage. You're going to see me saving a lot as we go. And let's take a look at that and see what's in there. What have I done? I've terribly confused code. I may have just found some kind of bug in code. Still alive there. Just bear with me. It seems like code is locked up because my cursor is not flashing or anything. Yeah, I've destroyed code somehow. Take that. Force quit. Okay, well, while code figures itself out, I'm going to show off tmux, and you can see now I've reconnected. So I'll create a new window here. Yep. And let's pull this up. So in the web folder, in source, it created a new directory in pages called homepage. In there's a couple things. Let's actually, so there's a homepage component. It's a standard React component, and I'll open that up in a minute. But the other stuff it's created to is a test out of the box to go with it. And for people that use Storybook, it's also created the stories to go along with that component. So they're leaning really heavily into using Storybook. A lot of developers are using that. I actually myself have not used it. And one of the reasons that I'm interested in Redwood is I'm trying to learn how to use Storybook more. So there was an appeal there in doing that. So why don't I just show you what those look like? I think. So up here, you can see it does a couple things. It goes and it's a standard React functional component. It's returning a render of what you see on the homepage. And there's a couple things that are interesting here to me. One was I hadn't actually seen these empty brackets for a component. So that was actually kind of a cool little hack. I normally put a div or something like that. Apparently you don't need that. You can just have tags like that with no element name, and React will do that. So right away, you've learned something you can take away. The rest of it is pretty standard. If you've worked with something like routers before, there's a link tag that it imports and then routes. So down here, we're using that to render a link on the homepage. And we're also using something called named routes. So named routes might be familiar to people coming from Ruby on Rails, but they're less common from what I've seen in JavaScript frameworks. And the cool thing here, this is the named route right there, is that in your routing, you can go and say this path wherever is the home, and then you can change that later. So right now, home will go here. One second. We'll pull up a route file. Where is it? Routes. Yeah, they use capitals for a lot of things, and I have to admit that throws me off still. Yeah, in here, this is a route. You can see it defines the homepage for the path, but then it gives a name here. So I could go and change this to be something like /home. It's going to understand that and update throughout the app anywhere that I'm using the named path. You can still hard code in those paths if you want to, but this can be useful if you are refactoring and moving stuff around later in a more complicated app. Okay, let's see if I can get my Visual Studio code back. Fingers crossed. Okay. Right. Box attach. Woohoo! Okay, so we got everything back. It looks like you could see there. Let me quickly show that again. One of my favorite things about Tmux is it lets you keep your session running even if you get disconnected from the server. So Screen is another tool that does something similar, but it's very handy when you have to do things like restart SSH clients. So I'm doing tmux -attach, and then all of my windows that were there before are still there and alive. So woohoo, thumbs up for tmux. Over here now too. Okay, so let's jump back to the YouTube channel for a minute and just see if there's any questions. All right, yeah, okay, so there's some good comments here. Let's pop those up, and I'll remember to take them down. So Brian Hill is jumping in to let us know that the tags without like an element name in them are called fragments. Right, okay, I've heard of those. And looks like you can also use fragment once you import React. And yeah, they're just a simple way to do it. If anyone knows why that would be better than using a div, for example, I'd be very curious to know and share that. So please jump into the comments and let us know. Okay, and we also have a question to see what is in the package.json. So I'll pull that up here. So there's actually two package JSONs. Let's hide our console here again. And so we'll start the one up here for the API. Right now they're just pulling in Redwood.js API, it looks like. So I assume that that is because that way they can kind of hide what they are using and potentially change that in the future. And on the web side, yeah, forms, router, web, that makes sense. And then React DOM, and prop types. So not too crazy. I mean, you could type that out yourself if you had to. So that's nice. Let me know in the comments if there's something specific that you would like to know there. But okay. All right. Any other questions? Just throw them in the comments and we'll keep moving. Oh, okay. And we're getting a description from Eddie. He is telling me that it is better than a div, less objects in the DOM, shallower nesting, and easier to style. No pesky divs in the way. Perfect. Nice. All right. Well, thank you, Eddie. I definitely appreciate that. And it looks like Brian has a little to add there, or Byron, excuse me, has a little to add there too. There you go. All right. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate that. Okay, so back to the tutorial. So we've got this homepage component. It comes with a test and stories, and by default, it updates the route for you. So if we come back over here, you can see, ta-da, our homepage is updated. And the nice thing too is this is all running in React, and it's running in WebKit with hot reloading. So I should be able to go back and find this and say something like allow, sure. Oh, I should never have installed those recommended extensions. Wow. Oh my goodness. I did not do this in my rehearsal. Okay, so here we can just maybe add a message. Exchange.js. Save that. And now if you come back here, you can see it's already hot reloaded and showing us what we need there. So hot reloading, awesome. So moving down, yeah, you can see in the tutorial, they go through the routes a little bit, explain the named route, things like that. And then, yeah, here you can go and actually change the routing, and that is also hot reloaded, from what I understand. So let's pull up our routes file again, change the name or the path to O. And back here, it's reloaded to say it's not found. And if we go here, it's come up. But the interesting thing too is because we're using a named route, you can see it's actually updated. Maybe you can't see it because it's quite small. But here, you can see that my element now links to hello. Pretty cool. Named routes, very handy. So let's pull this back one more time, back to how it's supposed to be. There we go. And you can see on the same page, thanks to the named route, it is updated it again, and it's pointing back to the same place it was before. All right, so a lot of this stuff for anyone coming from Rails, you should be used to routing and things like that, kind of pages, things like that. But we're going to work our way into linking, and then I'd like to get to cells if we can, because cells are where it gets really interesting. Yeah, and actually, we're seeing a comment here from Kelsey. So he was asking or pointing out that in fact it is using its own router. Yes, that's actually come up a few times. Apparently they have reasons for doing that. I don't understand the framework enough to do that, but if you certainly reach out, I can get you an answer for that. And I believe it was because they wanted to be able to have a slightly different syntax in terms of how things nested and stuff like that. But yeah, unfortunately, I do not know the answer to that question. I will get you one. Okay, so down here, we're going to add a new page. Sorry, where is it? Called boat, because every app needs an about page. Let's bring up our console again. So again, from anywhere in the app, we can use our generator. So now I'm not in API or web, I'm just in the root. Let's see what it does. So it goes and we've made a new page again. So you can see it's gone and updated the route. So if we push that down a little. So right here, you can see there's a new page called About. And just from the name of the page, it infers a lot. It infers the path and the name of it. It infers the name of the component. And then it creates the component with the actual component file, the test, and the stories to go with it. Let's hide that and we'll take a look at what it's made. So up here, we've got a new about page. So again, very similar, just a functional component. By default, they have the link for the route, and that's about it. If we want to link to that from the homepage, it's super simple. I'm going to save this so I don't mess it up. Add about page. You'll hear me reading out my commit messages a lot, and I apologize for that. Okay, so down here, we're going to go and, of course, we're building a blog because that's what you build. So we'll replace what's rendered. We'll update the fragment. And this time we'll use a named route to link to the about page from the home page. So here, come on back, paste that in, save it. And if we come back to our browser, there we go. It's already updated. And you can see about points to the about page. So pretty simple. I'm just kind of following through with those generators there. I'm not going to explain too much more about that. Yeah, they are really big on the function components. You'll tend to see everything that's generated will use those along with React hooks rather than using classes. And link looks very similar to what is in something like React Router or Gatsby. So if you're used to it from those, you'll probably be used to it from this. And you can update all of these when you do your generation. You can change names and things like that, change routes. We're not going to do that for now, but it's very much that Rails style of having a convention for things, but then you can configure things if you want to. So on the about page, right now, there's no way to get back to the home page. So we'll update it, use that named route for home to link us back. All right, a nice little sassy message there too. Let's see. All right. So there you go. We can link back to this page. We can return home and we can go back between them. So nice, fast, simple. We've got some links in place. Let's move on to something interesting. So layouts start to get more interesting. They're going to be very familiar. Anyone that has built anything complicated with React has probably introduced a layout component. That's essentially all they are in this. There's just a couple things for imports and stuff like that to make them a little simpler. And they come with a generator so that it's quick and simple to build new layouts that you can use in your app. So we're going to make a blog layout. Let me just save a touch point here, link pages together. Normally I would actually stage my commits, but I'm not going to today. And let's pull up our console. Okay, so you can see we're running a lot of generators here. So Redwood generate layout blog. Okay, so very similar to how we did with the other one. It's not going to update any routing, but it generates, because it's a component, it's going to generate a story and a test file to go along with the component that it just added. So let's take a look at that. So back over here in our web, there's a layouts folder, and now we've got a blog layout folder with a blog layout. So pretty simple for now. For anyone that's new to React, I will just point out one thing. It takes in a single property called children. So children, for anyone unfamiliar with React, is a special property. If you have a element in React and you nest any other elements inside of it, when you want to access those and pass those through JavaScript, they're going to be passed in as a special property by React itself, by the framework called children. And then you can go, and this will basically just contain a set of React VDOM elements that you can then render how you would any other tag anywhere else in your application. So this will basically just, whatever you wrap in blog layout, it will render inside blog layout later. All right, I'm going to be good. I'm going to stage my changes because you're supposed to stage your changes first. Always check what you're committing, then save that. And let's go back to our tutorial and make this a bit more interesting. So down here, what we're going to do is in our about and our homepage, we have a lot of duplication there in terms of the headers and everything else. So we're going to steal that. We want to avoid duplication as much as we can. here. Sorry, grab those round brackets and drop that in right here. Nice. And oh yeah, looks like I haven't imported routes or link. So import link routes from, and it's Redwood web. And did this right. Looks good. Okay, so we've got a layout. That's great. None of our pages are using it. So how do we get it onto the pages? Well, as you can guess, it's pretty simple. So let's go to our homepage first. So for anyone who's used the layouts and layout components in other React apps, it's just going to be the same thing. So go, and I think we can just say import blog layout. Is that right? Blog layout. Okay. Yeah, from source layouts, blog layout. And I'll explain that in a second there. Source layouts, blog layout. Sorry for jumping back and forth. Just to make sure I've got this right. Hopefully no one is dizzy from all of that. So what I've done here is I'm importing blog layout, and even though I'm in homepage, you can see here that this is not like a normal relative path or anything like that. So one of the cool things with Redwood is that it's configured with Webpack so that it knows about some standard directories out of the box, including the web one. So I can just do source layouts, blog layout, and it will know to import this component. So the other interesting thing too that you'll notice if you're really paying attention here is that the actual file it's importing is in this folder. It's in source layouts blog layout, but it's actually called blog layout.js. So you would think I would write this, but someone at Redwood realized that was annoying and extra typing. So it's smart enough to know that that and this are the same thing. Let's look at our homepage, see what it looks like. All right, so we're back home. Oh, something went wrong. Boat undefined. Routes. Did I do something wrong there? Okay. This is what I get for typing during a. Oh, I know. I imported from Redwood web. It should be from Redwood router. Try that again. Hey, there we go. All right. So we're now using a layout component with a little bit of Redwood wrapping around it, just meant to make it a bit easier to use with generators and with cleaner import statements. So let's see if we can also update the about page to do that as well. So link and routes from the router, and then blog layout from the blog layout folder. I'm going to type that because I'm going to remember that. Okay. So we're importing links and routes already. Import blog layout from source layouts blog layout. Okay. And put the link back home. And let's take a look and see. All right, so there we go. So we've introduced some layouts. We're using them on 2 pages. Again, pretty standard stuff. We're going to get into the data layer next, but I will take another quick pause here. It looks like there's some comments. So Kelsey is saying, 1 second, let me pull that up on the stream here so everyone can see. So Kelsey is saying tree shaking is nice, but would you ever want to use Redwood but not Redwood router? That is a good question. I know that especially at the start of the project, there was a lot of activity around the router. Because I, from what I understand, there was initially hopes to use React Router, and then they found that that wasn't working for what they were doing. I think really I would have to get some background there to tell you exactly why, or if it would even be possible to use it without it. Right now, they're not using things like server-side rendering, but my understanding is that here, actually, I can bring this up. There is a roadmap because Redwood is actually pretty good about these kind of things. And on there, I know server-side rendering is part of it. So if we come down here, auth core, yeah, like they have a really solid list of stuff that they're going to be working on, which is part of what I like. Yeah, pre-rendering. And so I believe part of the issue with pre-rendering is why they had to have their own router. I think there was also some performance issues they were seeing. Yeah, oh yeah. So we've written our own router. We've taken the stance of desiring a flat routing scheme versus a nested one, and this currently comes with some performance downsides that need to be addressed. Okay, so it sounds like they've picked it because it's a flat routing scheme. Honestly, I could not tell you the difference between a flat or a nested one and why you would want one or the other. But it sounds like that is what they've done, and now they have to deal with some performance downsides. So there you go. Hopefully that answers your question. If anyone wants to find this too, one of the cool things is there's a link to the roadmap right at the top of the page on redwoodjs.com. So very easy to find this roadmap, and they have been updating it, it seems like, as they progress and make work happen. Yeah, Kelsey is just saying, gotcha, there's still some problems to solve. Definitely. They're dependent on a couple other libraries too. There's something that we'll see in a minute called Prisma Migrate, and it will basically go and compare two snapshots of your data schema and then generate the migrations for whatever database you're using to move between versions. It's worked pretty well for me, to be honest. But having said that, I believe that Prisma has not given it the 1.0 stamp yet. And so therefore, they're not going to release Redwood.js with a 1.0 stamp until the tools that it needs to work are also at 1.0. So, okay, so that's layouts. I'm not going to spend too much more time on these. I think most people will be able to pick those up pretty quickly. And what? Oh yeah, we're going to add one more thing, just to link back to the home so that we can get that in all our pages. Header. Yeah, there we go. Now, go back. You can see the header on our page links back to home. Okay, let's save this again. Add notes to all the pages. Okay. Okay, and get rid of the return to home link on the about page. Okay, we don't need to link back to the home. Okay, so we're going to start to getting into some of the more interesting things. So this is where we're going to look at the database schema a little bit. So for me, honestly, this is one of the newer areas that I am not really familiar with Prisma as a tool. And even GraphQL, I've used the GitHub GraphQL API. I've used a couple other GraphQL APIs when I've been working with Gatsby, but I haven't ever really implemented a large one myself or had to deal with the database that backs it. And that's really what this section is concerned about. So you can see down here, we're going to define basically our database. So we say for the data store, that's going to be the kind of database that you're using. For development purposes, we're using SQLite, but in a lot of their production deploys, it could be Postgres. It seems like a lot of projects use that. Just a few weeks ago, someone did some work to get Redwood working with Fauna, which is a serverless and hosted database option. So there are certain ones out there. It's focused on relational databases right now, just because honestly, that's what most apps use still is relational. But again, by customizing the services, you could make it work with other databases as well. So data source, describes what kind of database you're using essentially. The generator client will describe the different clients to generate. So right now we only have the web one that we need to worry about. And so it's going to use the Prisma library to generate a JavaScript client to connect to our database and to our GraphQL service. From what I understand, if you had different sides written in different languages, this is where that would go. So, and then below that, we have our models, right? And so this is a blog. We're going to have a model for our posts. So you can see right here, they'll go through this in the tutorial later, but essentially we have an ID column. It's auto-incrementing by default. We have a couple strings for the title and the body, and then we have a timestamp indicating when it was created. So that's good. How do we get that into our app? So let's start. One other thing I will point out, because they pointed it out here and it did come up, was whether you could use GUIDs or GUIDs and UUIDs and stuff like that. You certainly can, but for this, they are sticking to auto increment just to keep some of the URLs looking a bit simpler. Like you can see here, it's 1, 2, 3 instead of this whole long GUID there. But there's nothing that would prevent you from doing that in production if you needed to. Okay, so I'm going to update to add this to our database. I'm going to go up, update the schema, and then I'm going to go and create migrations to apply that schema. And so the interesting thing here is it's kind of broken out. You describe the schema, it goes and creates the migrations for you, and then in the next step, we'll apply those. So let's go through that. So I'm going to close all the pages I have right now, and let's open our schema. So out of the box, the generator just produces a user. We're going to replace that with our post and save this. Oh, there we go. Okay. And then let's go and generate our migration. So just so I get it right, I'm going to cut and paste, but I'll walk you through what this is. So we're going to use the db command, and under the hood, that's going to go and delegate to Prisma migrate. So we're going to save migrations that would go and look at the current database, look at what's in the schema, and take us from one to the other. And everything after save is actually going to be used as the name of the migrations. So you can call it whatever you like, but they seem to use spaces in it, which was unusual to me. It just seems to be what they do, so that's fine. And you'll see that the name create post is going to be used in the migrations that we generate right now. Okay, so it's spinning. That's fine. And now, so it's gone and it's created our migrations folder for us, because before that didn't even exist. So let's take a look at what's in there. Okay, so in the migrations folder, it's created a little block file. So basically this is going to store a reference to where your database is at any given moment in time. So it can tell that way which migrations have and haven't been applied. And then it's going to come down here and it creates a folder for each migration. It seems a little heavy to me, to be honest, but I think maybe they're just documenting as much as they can right now. But it has a snapshot of the database, like the schema, at the point when this is applied. It has a description of the steps that it would apply to go and move between the previous schema and this one. And then, yeah, it just has like a little README basically saying this is what it would look like in SQL and what the differences are. So there's a lot in these migrations, but at this point, what we've done is we've created them. They haven't been applied anywhere. So they're not actually running or present in our SQLite database yet. So I'm just going to save this. Let's quickly do that. Okay. Create initial migrations. So again, they're created. Migrations are ready, but they haven't been run yet. So we need to run them. So back over here, our last command we do is this. So you can see now they've gone from Redwood here to the shorter RW. So yarn Redwood DB up, like migrate up or down. And done. So I'm going to make this a little bigger just so we can look at what it did there. So what it did is it went and it applied the migrations, and then we'd indicated that we wanted it to generate client code to go with the schema. So it goes and actually generates new JavaScript code to call back to that API layer. And that is going to be stored, and you can import it like this. So we'll look at that in a minute. But basically right now, it's not only updated the schema, it's also created the code that we need to work with that schema. Okay, so for me, this was some new stuff. So I'm going to pause here and take some questions, if there are any. How familiar are people with Prisma, GraphQL in general? I'm just going to check over in our Slack too and see if there's any questions there. All right, a couple comments here. All right, okay, so we have a question from Eston. It's a good one too, so let's talk about this. So Eston is saying, it seems like using a database doesn't really align with their Jamstack and scaling philosophy. Maybe I'm missing something. Do they pre-render the content to static content? So no, they don't. So this serves a little different use case than traditional Jamstack applications. It's more along the lines of something that we'd use if you're like a Facebook or something like that, right? So they go and for a static site, right, which is usually what people think of when they think of Jamstack, it could be something like Gatsby. Here's Gatsby for people that haven't seen that before. Yeah, so it's very similar in a lot of ways. It's based on React and it uses GraphQL, but the time that GraphQL and all of the database is accessed is different. So with Gatsby, you have a build step. It goes, retrieves information, and this is a generalization, I guess, but it retrieves the information using a GraphQL at build time and then statically renders your website. And once it's rendered, it goes and it serves it to people off of a CDN or anything like that. And you can then go and have an additional hydration step. And so what that means is that it goes from being a static website to loading in React on top of it. And so that's pretty much seamless. So what it rendered on the server is the same as what you'll see when you're seeing it on the client. But the difference is that the full GraphQL API is not usually exposed. If you're doing updates and things like that, you need to find another way to pull that data in. And Gatsby is primarily focused on doing that server side, like rendering in advance. Often, Gatsby, when you have React in it, it's not going to be something where you're necessarily working with an API from the client, whereas Redwood is on the opposite end of the spectrum there. So you're still building a static React client, which you would deploy on a CDN or something like that. But for right now, at least, it's not focused on the pre-rendering. what it is focused on is having that static React app then talk to an API, right? And so like in Jamstack, it's JavaScript, API, and markup. And so there's been a real focus, I think, on the JavaScript and the markup side of it, and less on the APIs, especially for apps that you're seeing coming out of a lot of contractors and things like that. And so they're trying to make it easier to build that interactive dynamic part where you want to have a Jamstack application where the front end and the markup and the JavaScript are all served off a CDN, so you get those advantages. But you still have some API that is talking to a database or talking to something like that on the other end, and need a simple and performant way to be able to do that without having to write that binding code once on the server and then a second time in your JavaScript client. And then I think the idea too is that as they add more sides, you wouldn't have to write it 3 times, right? You could have it written in React Native or Flutter, and you could go and when you introduce a new service, a new page, whatever, it would use Prisma to generate the bindings for all of those different sides so that you can go and have the same services and APIs and have them available on different clients. So it's just basically, I would think of Gatsby as being not like you can use Gatsby and like focus on rehydrating to serve an interactive, React app that is a client for an API somewhere, but it's primarily focused on like rendering in advance and serving pages where 95% of the content is rendered in advance. With Redwood, it's the other way. You're focused on those CRUD apps and things like that, where you want to be able to go and have people engaging with something that is like either served from a database that you manage and building an API in front of that, or you have an API that you are engaging with. And you can actually have it where it's Redwood on the front end, your API there calling out services that could be calling out GraphQL on the server on your behalf for the client on the front end. You can wrap and kind of merge those together into that GraphQL API however you want. So I'd say it's a pretty heavy bet on GraphQL as the way for pulling those services together and for applications to expose, their databases and things like that. But I do like how it's kind of opinionated about that, and doing that all by hand can be very challenging. So this makes that a bit simpler to do and kind of gives you something with reasonable defaults out of the box, which is what I like about Rails in a lot of ways too, right? So if you like Rails, you'll probably like that, as long as they're making decisions that everyone can get on board with, I guess. Okay, so hopefully that answered your question. Please, if I didn't explain it very well, please jump in there and let me know, and I'll try to clarify a bit more. Kelsey, it looks like you have a question too. Let me pull that one up. Okay, Kelsey says, Prisma is new to me. I did see it bill itself as a replacement for an ORM, and I'm trying to figure out how it's different. Have a quick rundown. So honestly, my exposure for Prisma is through Redwood. So I'm probably not going to be able to give you all the details on this, but I can explain what I know. There's a few things going on with Prisma. So before this, this is version 2. And so version 2 was like a complete rewrite. It's quite a bit different because prior to this, like in version 1, they were very tied to a GraphQL service that they were providing called GraphQL, like GraphQL with the word cool stuck on the end of it. I'm still not sure I'm pronouncing it properly. Anyway, they found that a lot of their customers that they were working with still had things in relational databases that were interacting with other existing apps, things like that. And so that use case of people wanting to be able to integrate with an existing relational database and finding that like 90% of their clients, if they were using a database, it was Postgres or MySQL or like an existing database product, even if they weren't integrating with a legacy system, drove them to basically rewrite for Prisma 2. And so now they're a lot more focused on you define a schema that where is it? This schema.prisma. And their sense is that they go and let you plug in what you want for your data source here, for your generators there, for the clients. And it will go and take what's in this schema and apply it to your database and build the clients that you need to access it. And it uses GraphQL as the API for connecting those two together. So I'm sure I'm not explaining that 100% properly because, like I said, my exposure to Prisma is fairly limited. But yeah, basically, from what I understand, you've got your Prisma schema, which is their like DSL written in their dialect. You say, this is the database I'm trying to interact with, like whether it's an existing or a new one. You get it to run the migrations, and it will go and set it all up with the tables or wherever else you're using so that it can interact with it properly, and then generate the clients on the other side so that you can do that. And apparently, like a lot of the migration tools and the parsing, I was quite surprised to see that they've actually rewritten that, and it's all in Rust now, which, kind of different, kind of a bold choice, I'd say. So we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, right now you can see that they use, where is it here? It works with Postgres, MySQL, and SQLite. And apparently they're looking at adding other non-relational databases and things like that to it. So yeah, you can see here, set up Prisma, introspect on an existing database, generate a client, send queries, things like that. So it's kind of trying to be the glue between relational and existing databases, and all of these kind of interesting JavaScript clients that would like to use stuff like GraphQL and things like that. So hopefully that answers your question, Kelsey. Hopefully I didn't mess up anything in terms of explaining it for the Prisma people. I'll see if I can get a better description there. And honestly, maybe we'll do a talk on Prisma at some point because I personally would like to understand it more, even if it's just to decide if I want it to be part of my stack or not. But it definitely does seem to be something that is coming up more often. So at the very least, understanding it might be useful. Okay, hopefully I answered those questions. I'm going to move on, but please feel free to blast more at me if you have them. Mhm. All right. So if anyone from the watch party also wants to jump on the stream, go for it. I will hook you up if you'd like to. Okay. So we'll close Gatsby here, and let's go back to where we were. So we've created posts, we've done a database, we've created database migrations, and we've applied them. So now we have a post table, but we don't have any way to edit them. So this is where you will really see the similarities to things like Rails. So we're going to scaffold a post, and that's going to create all the URLs, like the routes, all the different pages, all the different tests on the website. And on the API side, it's going to create the services that will connect everything together so that I can go on the front end and retrieve posts, create posts, edit, delete, all those kind of things. So let's do that. I'll make sure I'm not missing any changes here. Nope. Okay. Generate me some post scaffolding. So you can see this, like when you do this in Rails, generates a lot more. So on both the web and the API side, it's hitting the GraphQL and it's updating our schema definitions. It's adding basic, like CSS for some of the pages that it's creating, things like that. So what we're going to do is, instead of going through these files, we're going to take a look at what it looks like on the front end, and then we can come back and dig into these a little bit. So, done this correctly. Ooh, so you can see, I'm going to show this in just a moment when we get into cells, but I would just like to show what happened there because something very interesting happened. So let's switch to slow 3G and try reloading this page again. So it's coming up and it's going to load the static markup in JavaScript, which it has now. And then you saw that message there that said loading. And then it has this one that says no post yet, create one. So it's actually going and it has out of the box things there for the different states of your data. So whether it's loading, whether there are no things in a collection, whether there's an error, out of the box, it handles those for you. And those and that like logic can actually get very confusing to manage as your application grows. And doing that properly without having race conditions and things like that in React can be quite tricky, especially for new developers. So we'll get into what's going on there. That's some of the stuff with cells that we'll talk about in the next section. But it's really cool. It comes out of the box. It's very nice because it makes a lot of headaches go away. Okay, so I'm back on normal internet. Let's make that go away. And you can see Exchange is rocking Redwood. Yes. Woo. Woot. Woot. Save. So, and it's not pretty. It's probably not gonna be the kind of thing that would make designers very happy. But you can see we've got all the basic pages in here. You can edit things, delete things, stuff like that. So I'm gonna make just a few of these. Hello from Edmonton. Oh, woohoo. All right, I don't know where these blog posts are coming from, but that we've got. You also saw maybe quickly there that little notification that popped up as well. So that is like a flash or an alert, depending on the platforms that you're coming from. That's provided out of the box too. So let's jump back to our tutorial here. Yeah, you can see it's gone through all the pages. Showing how they're made, but let's get into the breakdown of what they're actually doing. So when we ran that, it's going to go and do a few things. It's going to make this SDL.js file. And what that defines is, the queries and mutations that you can use through the API. So queries, for anyone familiar with GraphQL, are meant to be read-only. And so they're just for accessing information about the posts, whereas mutations would be stuff like if you're creating or deleting. And so they're very separate in GraphQL. And this file has the definition for that. So let's take a look and see what it did. Let's go back to this view. So in the API, close that for a minute, and you can see we've got a GraphQL folder. That's where those SDL files go, the schema definition. And so in here, you can see we've got a post, which is a GraphQL type. It's sort of like a shape of an object that we can use. And then we've got a couple queries, one to get posts and one to get a specific post that takes in an ID and returns a post. And then they also use these interesting things that are called input types. I hadn't seen them at all until I worked with Redwood here, but they basically let you go and define your type here and then use it elsewhere in mutations and things like that without having to repeat all these title and body fields again and again. So it's not as big a deal. You could go and basically substitute this in for there and that in for there. But as your object get more complicated, it can be handy to go and have these input types. Apparently, it's a best practice, I guess, for GraphQL. That's why I'm using this, because they know about these GraphQL best practices, which I do not know about. I'm learning. So yeah, so it's defined what we can do. Basically, we've got queries for finding the whole collection for individual posts, creating, updating, and deleting posts. That's what we should take from that. On the flip side too, in the services folder, it's gone and created a post.js file. And one of the interesting things you see here is like this is called posts and this is called post. Well, those are exactly the same names. Let me get that open. As the queries that you see here, right? See, this query is called posts and that one is called post. It takes in an ID. This function is called posts, and this function is called post and takes in an ID. So using Prisma and Redwood, it's smart enough to know that you don't have to do that wiring yourself. As long as you have a query called posts, it will go and look for a file called post.js in the post folder and services. And then whatever you do here, it's going to go and use that to retrieve the posts that are returned from the GraphQL API that we're exposing to the web. This DB here is interesting. So that's, you can see Prisma client just comes up there. That is the client that's automatically generated. So the DB client here is talking directly to SQLite through Prisma. The posts and all these service methods are what's going to be exposed through GraphQL over HTTP or HTTPS to the website of the application. So you can already start to see like writing all of this connection and plumbing on your own could be very burdensome. And so this is where they are really following that convention model of tying things together in different directories and stuff using conventions. So the other interesting thing too is that these are not restricted to being used in GraphQL. So because these services are separated out into separate JavaScript files, you could go and if you have something where you're querying for posts related to an author in your authors service, you could go and import the posts service and use the methods that you define here elsewhere in your API without having to call into GraphQL and things like that. So it's just JavaScript. That's the cool thing is you can import these pretty much anywhere that you can in Node and use them. So what else should we show here? So on the web side, it's gone and it creates a posts layout, which relies on some of the scaffolding that comes out of the framework itself. Yeah, so stuff like Flash, you can see here, it comes in. You can also see the components. It makes quite a few of them, to be honest. It makes things for the different edit forms, all the different forms that you see, the post cell, which we'll go into in a minute here. Actually, here, I'll just quickly, well, wrong one. I'll just quickly show, we'll look at these cells in a minute, but you can see it has loading, empty, and success, and that actually will show you the messages that you see as this query is executed. So like the one we saw before is, why am I really bad at clicking on these? Posts cells. So you can see here, these are the actual messages that we saw on that list of posts where it says loading. When it's empty, it says no post yet, links to create one. And then it also has a success that shows them. And not shown here is an error case too. So if something goes wrong, you can show that. Any other questions? What else? Oh, it generated the routes that we needed out of the box too. So you can see it's added all the routes here. I don't think we're going to make it into routing today, but I'll just quickly point out that if you are familiar with routing and things like Rails, you can have part of the URL be a parameter that gets passed into the page. It's exactly the same here. So, we're passing in the ID, and that will get passed into the post page component as one of the properties on it. So its router will just pick things up from the path, just like how you would with some of the other routers up there. Okay. So why don't we jump back to the tutorial for just a minute? I don't think there's too much more that it's going to go through. Yeah, let's get into how the actual cells work. So the last thing that I think we'll do to wrap this up today is just show how we have a list of posts there on the post page. It's not very interesting if we're doing a blog if we can't see those on the home page too. So I'll walk you through how to create a cell and retrieve the information about the posts and then show it on the home page. But first, let's take questions. All right, if I don't see any come in here in a minute, I'm going to just move on, and then maybe I'll jump in to the watch party to take questions in person. All right, last chance at removing them. Okay. So last but not least is cells. So cells are pretty simple. They're basically almost like just a convention. You're going to have a GraphQL query that is meant for retrieving information, and then you just in your file you export a couple different components. You export one for loading that's shown before the query is run, if it's empty, if there's an error, or if there's success. And the cool thing is that when you're using these in Redwood, it will go and take these and just automatically wrap them up and turn them into a component that you can include in your pages. So I know right now looking at this, it doesn't look like a standard React component, and it's not, but what it will do is when you import them, it will actually go and turn it into a component for you. So when you're using it in pages that use cells, all you need to know is you just use it like a normal component. If you need new information, you update the query, and that is it. So it's pretty slick. Let's clear out our changes. Hold some posts. Okay, so back to the tutorial. So what we're trying to do today is on the homepage right now, it's pretty boring. You go, you see a link to the About page, but you don't actually see any of those blog posts that we just created. So the way we're going to get those on there is we're going to write a cell to pull those in from the database. So back in our query here, we're going to use a generator to produce the scaffolding for our cell. So we're going to generate a cell and we're going to call it blog posts. So you can see here, it really is just a component, right? And so Redwood is smart enough to know how to handle it, but it just put it right into the components folder because that's what it is. Close these and take a look at what is in there. Okay, so if we take a look at our cell, excuse me, if we take a look at our cell here, what we're going to see is those same methods that were defined before, right, in the tutorial for loading, for empty, for failure and success, and then our query up here. And if we want to use it, all we need to do is include this component. So we'll use that on the home page next. So coming down here, yeah, they point out too that you can use for these any convention that you want, as long like underscores, dashes, capital letters, as long as it has some way to tell the start of one word from the other. If you called it like blog posts like that, that's not going to work. It's not smart enough to see that blog and posts could be two words, but all of these different formats will work. Okay, so the only change that they make here is we called our cell blog posts. By convention, it's going to run a query looking for blog posts. But when we actually set up our schema, we called them posts. So if we change that, we'll also need to change it down here. Whatever values that you query for here, like this name is going to be the name of the object that is passed in as a property to the success functional component. So if we change posts or blog posts to posts here, we need to change it here as well. So let's do that. Okay. So let's add this. So, and just like that, we can drop this in to our homepage and we're gonna see a call out to the API that's driving the website and retrieve the post that we just created. So in our homepage, import blog posts cell from source blog posts. And then down here, we're going to return that. Why is it mad at me there? No, I don't want to do that. And okay, so let's go back to our homepage and see if I did that properly. And we did. It's not pretty, it's nothing fancy, but you can see it's retrieving 2 blog posts, ID 1 and 2, and then it's serializing them to JSON. Check my stream here. Any questions? Nope. Looking good. Okay, keep those questions coming if you have any. So at this point, we're retrieving data from the database using the GraphQL API in between. And right now we're using the developer server so that we can go and make changes, and Webkit will, or Webpack will reload everything. But we could build these into static assets and deploy them if we wanted to, and it would run against an API running somewhere on the internet. Okay, so I think the last thing we'll do to finish this up today is we will go and just make that look a little prettier because it's pretty ugly right now. So to do that, it's pretty simple. We're going to update our query to pull in the rest of the information that we'd like. So for anyone that is not familiar with GraphQL, basically what I'm doing is it's almost like a select in SQL. So here I'm going to call that posts function running on the GraphQL server, which we know is going to talk to the database. And then from the GraphQL API, we're going to say for everything that comes back from that, just give me the ID, the title, the body, and create it up. So now those are available here. So if I save this and come back, we should be seeing those now. Run this properly. Oh, we're not. Why are we not seeing those? And oh, what have I done wrong? I saved that. Let's check my server. Someone's got a comment here. I wonder if they know what's going on. No. Oh, hey. Okay, let me just reload this page. I did not have. Sure. Okay. There we go. It looked like there was an error there about file watches or something on the server, so maybe I've just done something wrong there. Okay, so as you can see, it's reloaded, and now the JSON that it's dumping out has all that information, but it's still super ugly. So to wrap this up, all we'll do is take that and we're going to update cell one more time. And so we've updated the query. Down here, let's update this. So now, instead of just dumping that out as JSON, we're going to dump it out with some formatting. And if I've done this properly, and it's feeling nice to me, yeah, for 1 sec. I'll read my error messages. System limit for number of file watchers reached. Okay. I think that's something I've done when I installed all those extensions. Mhm. There we go. Okay, so we're gonna wrap here, but you can see that it's gone. It's now retrieving data from the API. It is going and taking that data and rendering it as a component. And that component is coming from one of these cells. So again, I'm just gonna show this one more time. If I do switch, we'll do a fast 3G. I think we're fast enough to see this. So you can see it comes in, it's going to show loading, and then it's going to pop up again. So you can see it's handling those different states for us automatically. All right. So I think this is a good place to stop tonight. If there are any other questions, I'm happy to take them right now. We haven't gotten into form handling, but it does actually have some pretty cool options for things like form handling, as well as auth, and then finally deployment, which we didn't talk about either. But if people are interested, I would be happy to do another follow-up for this at a date in the future. Or yeah, I can maybe break those down into some small talks or something like that too. So yeah, does anybody have any questions? Otherwise, I will jump into the watch party. All right. Okay, so we're gonna wrap it there. Um, what I will tell everyone is that I know we were Wednesday out of band this month. Next month will be October, and we are going to be back on a normal first Thursday of the month. We're looking for speakers and presenters. So if that is you, it sounds like we could use a talk on something like Prisma, and it would be really great to see a Gatsby talk to compare with this Redwood one. I think that comparison would be valuable for people trying to decide how to deploy Jamstack applications. And I know there's Vercel and a couple others out there as well, if people would like to know more about that. I personally think whatever kind of Jamstack framework or framework works come to dominate, it's definitely a model that is very useful if you are looking to build highly scalable and easily deployable apps. I have been using Gatsby now for about 6 months for a project, and despite the long build times in development, its pages are super snappy and fast in production, and I've been very happy with my experience with it so far. So let's just double check the date before we sign off here. So for the next meetup, we're going to be meeting on the first Thursday. So October 1st is the first of, it's a Thursday. So October 1st, 6:30 online here. And we will be announcing speakers soon. If you would like to speak, please let us know. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you later.